he is one of the, I think, most interesting, innovative writers about technology and the implications of the internet. He's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New Republic, many publications. An essay he wrote for The Atlantic in 2008, Why Google is Making Us Stupid, or Is Google Making Us Stupid, sorry. Caused light bulbs to go up, seeming a little stupid there. Caused light bulbs to go off, I think, in a lot of people's minds. I think it was very timely. It was right around the time that people began to think that, maybe the internet isn't as fully or as overwhelmingly a positive force as people had been thinking of it. And his career has moved forward, and his new book, The Shallows, takes up and expands on that whole argument. Joris Luyendijk is our moderator. We also have two distinguished panelists who, after Nicholas Carr speaks, will discuss and debate some of his issues. Nancy McKinstry is the CEO of Wolters Kluwer, which is the global publishing giant. And Marleen Stikker is the director of Waag Society, the Dutch digital creativity lab. Who will each, I think, have interesting perspectives on the material. Without any further ado, let me introduce a moderator who needs no introduction, Joris Luyendijk.
Thank you very much. That's right, I'll be moderating. Nicholas Carr will speak for about 30 minutes. Then the two panelists will react. We'll do a panel discussion, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for questions on your part. So that's the interactive bit. I think they're good books and they're great books. I think a good book upends some assumption you've been holding all your life, and so you change because you have to discard or revise the assumption. But great books actually make you aware of assumptions that you never knew you had in the first place. And I think this book, The Shallows, is a great book. And it throws out so many of the assumptions I had about what the internet would be. And more than anything, it basically boils down to the fact that the internet seems to be rewiring our brains. So we are becoming different persons. And I always assumed that we were like a computer and we were going to run different software on ourselves. But now it turns out that we are being shaped by the internet, or so recent neurological research suggests. And that's why I have two pieces of advice for you. One is read this. Whoa! You see, that's why I never do introductions. One is read this book, and two, do not smoke a joint afterwards. Because if you do, which your moderator did, you may fall into the trap of a very bad trip. Because suddenly it seems that these machines are already among us, and they are harvesting our energies, and people 10, 12 hours a day stuck to their screens, unable to tear themselves away. On that note, before I give the floor to Mr. Carr, the book is all about distractions and how the internet is basically programming us for the distractions. Now, you may be distracted because you're wondering what the election results will be. At 9 o'clock there's an exit poll, and so we will announce the exit poll when it comes. So you don't have to keep checking your BlackBerry, or rather you have no justification to check your BlackBerry as you listen to the fantastic writer and speaker, Mr. Nicholas Carr.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I feel a little insulted that Malcolm Gladwell didn't even need one and I had to have one, but nevertheless, that's okay. And I want to thank the John Adams Institute for hosting this event, and my Dutch publisher, Maven, for their hard work in organizing it. I only use PowerPoint, by the way, to show that I'm not a Luddite. I don't really need it, but it's... A few weeks ago, when I was trying to put together some pictures to go along with my remarks, I was struggling with what a good image would be to start out with, to kind of summarize or encapsulate some of my thoughts. And it just so happened at that time that I received an email out of the blue from somebody I didn't know, somebody in Hawaii, who was reading my book, and he sent along this photograph that you see up here. I think this is a perfect way to introduce what I'm going to be talking about here briefly before we go into discussion. And I should say the fact that I could get this image from him, a person I didn't know, a person far away in Hawaii, shows one of the great strengths of the internet and one way it has improved, I think, all of our lives who use it. It allows us to find new things, new and unexpected things, whether it's information that we might not have come across otherwise, whether it's people who are reaching out to us with something. But I also think that this picture gets across how radically our lives have changed and society has changed in really just the last few years. I mean, it's only been 20 years since the World Wide Web was invented, and it's been only about 10 years or so since it began to come into broad use. And if you look at of course, he wasn't reading this is the cover of the American edition of my book, and of course he wasn't reading it on paper. He was reading it, a Kindle version running on his iPad. And as he pointed out in his email, as he began to read it, he looked down at his desk and realized that what I was talking about was the life he was leading. Not only does he have the iPad to read the book, but he has his iPhone next to it, and he has his computer on, and just so he can go a little faster, he has a cup of coffee as well. And this would have been unthinkable just a few years ago, how involved our technology has become with our moment-to-moment life, with our everyday life. And I think one thing that some of us have begun to notice, at least, and this corresponded is one of them, is that the relationship we have with the internet, with our computers, with our smartphones and so forth, has begun to reverse itself. In the beginning, they were very much our servants. We were very much the master of the technologies. But more and more, as they kind of involve themselves in all facets of our lives, our social lives, our work lives, the way we find information, the way we make sense of information, they're starting to become more and more the master of us. And we're taking on the role of the servant more and more. And that was the initial thought or the initial feeling I had that led me to write the book. I've been a big user of computers, big user of the internet for many, many years, but it was around 2007 that I began to realize that I was losing my ability to concentrate, losing my ability to focus on one thing, to pay attention to one thing. And I particularly would notice it when I'd sit down to read a book, which is an activity that always has come naturally to me, has always seemed a natural activity. And these days, I realized when I'd sit down with a long text, a long book, a long article, my mind didn't want to go linearly through page after page and read word after word. It wanted to jump around the way it does when I'm online, when I'm looking at a computer screen. It wanted to click on links, it wanted to check email, it wanted to do Googling and so forth. And for a long time, I had ignored this effect, thinking it was just a consequence of aging, or maybe I was too busy or whatever. But I made the realization that it wasn't just that my mind was drifting. It very much wanted to be distracted. It wanted to be connected. It wanted to be in the flow of information. And that's what started me off with the question, can our technologies, can a media technology, a computer technology, can any technology really change in any fundamental way the way we think in our thought processes? And I began to look in two different directions. One was in recent discoveries about neuroscience and how adaptable our brains are, how quickly they'll adapt to changes in our circumstances, changes in our environment, changes in the tools we use to gather information and find information. But the second stream of research was research into the history of technologies, to see if there are any patterns that we could learn from in the way technologies have come along and become popular, and then shifted the focus of our intellectual lives, of our mental lives. And it quickly became clear to me that among all the huge set of tools and technologies that human beings have used and continue to use, there's one small set that I call intellectual technologies that seem to have a particularly strong effect on the ways that we think. And intellectual technology is just a word for any kind of tool that we use to gather information, to sort information, to exchange information, to express ourselves. It's kind of tools that extend our mental powers rather than our physical powers. And I think if you look back through the intellectual history of humankind, you see over and over again that we shift often the emphasis of our thought, the quality of our thought, in response to new intellectual technologies that we adopt and begin to use broadly in many different ways. And you can go all the way back to, for instance, the map, which is so common, has been around since even prehistory that we don't even think of it as a tool or a technology. But in fact, the map had to be invented. It was a tool. There was a time in human history that there was no such thing as a map. And if you think about before the map came along, the only way people knew how to figure out where they were and where they were going was purely through sensory perception, purely through what they saw, maybe what they heard. As soon as the map came along, you have a radically new way to think about location, to place yourself in the physical world. And it's a radically abstract way that suddenly we have this representation of space rather than the actual sensory perception of space. And as the map spread and became more and more popular and more people began to use it, I think it's clear that not only did it change the way we got around and change our sense of where we were, but it began to give us a more abstract way of thinking in general. Suddenly people began looking beyond their sensory perceptions to see the hidden patterns in the world and in their surroundings. And a very similar thing happens, similar thing to what happened with space, with the map, happens to time with the introduction of the mechanical clock. And this is much, much later in the 14th century, 15th century. But up until then, people experienced time as a natural flow. And to the extent they measured time or tracked time, they used devices, they used technologies that emphasize that flow. And you introduce the mechanical clock, and suddenly time takes on a completely different nature. What had been a flow becomes a series of discrete, precisely measurable units. And of course, this had, just like the map, this had many practical effects, practical uses. People could schedule their time more precisely. You had big organizations in factories, in mills, so forth, that were able to coordinate the work of large amounts of people. But as with the map, I think the clock also shifted the way people think. It gave us, in general, a more scientific way of looking at the world, a way that focused on the progress of time as little bits, little measurable bits, and kind of focused our mind on cause and effect and long patterns of logic fitting together. So once again, we see new technology, a new intellectual technology that's invented and used for very practical reasons, also having a much deeper effect on the way we think. And I don't think it's any coincidence that shortly after you have the introduction of the mechanical clock, you have an explosion of scientific thinking, scientific discovery, you have the Enlightenment, and I think that certainly it wasn't all because of the mechanical clock, but it shows how our technologies, the technologies we use to think with, also affect the way that we think. And one way to express this is that I would argue that every intellectual technology has an intellectual ethic. In other words, it has a certain emphasis. It prizes or puts value and emphasis on certain ways of thinking, but it de-emphasizes other ways of thinking. And as the technology spreads through society and becomes used more and more intensively, we begin to adopt that intellectual ethic as our own ethic in the way we think, in the way we use our minds. And that doesn't mean that technologies invent these ways of thinking. The map didn't invent abstract thought. The clock didn't invent scientific thought. They had always been inherent in our minds. But a new technology comes along and it gives a new emphasis to a new way of thinking. one thing that's been unclear, even though historians of technology, intellectual historians, historians of media have shown over and over again that technologies have these deep effects on the way we think, what hasn't been clear is how they have these effects. What's going on? Because until recently, the assumption was that your mind as a child was very malleable, and up to the age of about 20, that's when you formed all the neural connections and neural pathways that you'd then have throughout the rest of your life. But it was assumed that our mind stopped changing at that neurological, biological level when we were 20. And after that, the model was kind of that our minds took form as kind of liquid concrete in our youth, and then hardened, and there was no change, there was no new neurons, there were no new pathways. What we've learned in the last 30 or 40 years is that's completely wrong. That in fact, the human mind is always adapting, it's always changing, it's always malleable down to the cellular level throughout the entire course of our life. And this is what brain scientists, psychologists call neuroplasticity. And the brain responds to what we use it for. When we change our habits of thought, those changes ultimately take shape in the actual connections between our neurons and the actual intensity of the connections in our synapses. And the brain is extraordinarily efficient. So whatever you use it for, and particularly whatever you use it a lot for, those neural pathways get stronger and stronger. But what you don't use it for, those neural pathways get weaker and weaker. And the brain doesn't care about the quality of our thought. It simply responds to how we use our minds. And there are many good things about this. It allows us to adapt quickly to new circumstances, to new tools. But inherent in that adaptability is the possibility of intellectual regress as well as intellectual progress. It all depends on what we do with our minds, and a huge influence on that, particularly today, when so much of our life revolves around media and around technology. A huge factor in that adaptation is the technologies we use, and particularly those intellectual technologies we use to gather information and to exchange information and so forth. So I think if we're going to think about the long-term effects of the internet, this technology that is invading more and more all aspects of our waking hours, and as our computers shrink, kind of is carried with us and is influencing our thought pretty much every moment of the day, we have to think about what the internet's intellectual ethic is. What kinds of thinking does the internet promote? What kind of thinking does it emphasize? Does it reward? And on the other hand, what kinds of thinking does it diminish the importance of? Does it not give us opportunities to practice and to exercise? And I think all of us who have used the net, have used digital media in any of its forms, know what kinds of thought it emphasizes and what kinds of thought it de-emphasizes. The net is an incredibly powerful technology in providing us access to information of all kinds. And its fundamental quality is the ability to give us a great deal of information very, very quickly, to encourage us and allow us to skim and to scan and to multitask, to follow lots of different things on a screen, to exchange lots of different messages. And the whole history of the web has been to give more and more emphasis to that skimming and scanning way of thinking. The net has qualities that encourages us through its connectivity, connects us not only to lots of information simultaneously, but to lots of other people, lots of other messages. It's a technology of multiplicity. It's the first media technology that can supply information in all forms, particularly in text as well as audio and video. One thing that even though television, for instance, and radio had a big impact on us, and we used them a lot and continue to use them a lot, they were never able to distribute text. So the printing press maintained its importance and kind of its centrality to culture, even as we spent more and more time with mass media. The internet, for the first time, can supply text as well as all other forms of media. And so what we see is more and more information, more and more entertainment, all naturally converges into the net because it's such an economically advantageous way of distributing it. The net, being a computer system, also puts a huge emphasis on velocity. All of us know as we use the web and use our personal computers and other devices over time, they train us to expect faster and faster responses. Anybody who's kind of gone from having a very fast internet connection to a slow one knows how painful even a few seconds can be when you're used to getting that immediate response. And so it's very good and very powerful at sending information to us very, very quickly in messages. And also it's, of course, an interactive system, which makes it all the more appealing and all the more useful. You can not only use it to gather information, but to express yourself and to connect your own thoughts with the thoughts of others. And all of these qualities of the net are extremely valuable and extremely powerful, and because of them, we use it so much and get so much benefits from it. But also, all of those qualities make it not only an information-rich system and put us into an information-rich environment, they also put us into an interruption-rich environment. When you go online, when you open your mobile phone or your smartphone, you're getting distracted by various alerts, various incoming messages, hyperlinks. Every characteristic of the net is a characteristic that makes it a very good interruption system, a very good distributor of distractions. In many ways, the most extreme form of this medium comes in video games, which very much encourage and reward rapid shifts in focus, keeping track of all sorts of information coming at you very, very quickly. And if you look at studies of video games, you see that, as you would imagine, as the brain adapts to that environment, it becomes better at doing video games. It becomes better at keeping track of lots of information. This is a chart from a famous study published in 2003 that shows, and this looks at, as you go along the chart, the number of elements that people are being required to keep track of in this experiment goes up. And then as you go up on the chart, that measures the error rate, how many errors they make in this test of how well they can keep track of lots of different information. And it's clear that non-gamers, as the number of stimuli, the number of images coming at them goes up, make a lot more errors than do heavy-duty gamers. So we see from this, and this is a consistent kind of finding in video game research, that certain visual skills, the ability to keep track of lots of things, to shift your focus, to spot patterns in an array of information, does seem to improve and improve substantially the more you use the technology. And it's not clear how much you can apply video game studies to the internet, but the environment of the internet is in many ways very similar to a video game environment in that you're constantly encouraged and constantly rewarded to shift your focus and keep track of lots of incoming information. On the other hand, what the technology, what the internet discourages is attentive thought, is the ability to screen out interruptions and distractions, to pay close attention to one thing for an extended period of time. There's no opportunity, there's no encouragement in the technology for that kind of deeply focused, immersive, kind of single-minded thinking. And if you think about it, throughout most of modern history, that kind of thinking was considered the ideal, was considered the highest form of thinking. Attentive, disciplined, focused. It was only 100 years ago that Rodin sculpted his famous sculpture called The Thinker that really embodied and served as a symbol for what people considered to be the highest, most human use of the mind. And this symbol, this statue, increasingly seems more and more outdated. There's no place for this guy on the internet. No place for that kind of often solitary, very focused way of using our mind. And here too, if you look at studies of internet use, you see all sorts of indicators that, in fact, we're training ourselves to be skimmers and scanners and multitaskers, but we're rarely practicing more attentive, more contemplative, more reflective, more introspective forms of thought. There was a study recently, a few years ago, that showed that the average time a person will look at a web page is 21 seconds. This was a study out of Germany. But then when they looked more closely, and that's pretty fast to begin with, but when they looked more closely, they realized that number was being inflated by the fact that people would often open a web page and then go on to something else, but leave the page open in the background of their screen. And so when you account for that, you find that most pages that we look at, we view for less than 10 seconds. And it doesn't matter how much information, how much text or other information is on the page. Our behavior is to glance at it very quickly, click a link, open a new tab, and go elsewhere. There was an interesting study of people who had desktop computers, and this was about 5 years ago, and they wanted to check how often workers will glance at their email inbox. And at first they asked the people, how often do you think you check your email? And they'd say, 4 or 5 times an hour maybe. And then they actually tracked their vision during the course of a day, and they found that people were glancing at their inbox 30 or 40 times an hour. And of course now we carry our inbox with us all day long. It's no longer just relegated to our desk. And again, each one of these little changes in focus may seem fairly trivial, but when you begin to realize that each is a break in our train of thought, and you begin to add them all up, not just email, but RSS feeds and Twitter alerts and Facebook updates and everything else coming at us, you begin to realize that we're really in a perpetual state of distraction, a perpetual state of shifting our focus. You see it as well in the number of text messages, SMS texts, that kids send, and increasingly adults as well. And these are numbers from the U.S. I apologize, I couldn't find ones for Holland, but the average American teen now receives or sends out about 3,300 texts a month. The average girl is over 4,000, actually. And again, what we see is a technology training us to not only to be distracted all the time, but to expect to be distracted and to get very uncomfortable, in fact, when anything goes silent. It seems like something's gone wrong when suddenly you're alone with your thoughts. And this trend is a fundamental characteristic of the progress of the internet. It wasn't that long ago when you'd go online and you'd go to a web page, and that's how you'd spend your time, and there might have been a lot of distractions, a lot of links. You might not have spent much time there, but they were kind of pages of more or less static information that you could take in. That model is being replaced by the social networking model, the Facebook model, the Twitter model of streams of information coming at us constantly and continuously, and particularly in small little bits that have some personal importance to us. So it's very, very hard to tune those out. You want to know what everybody's talking about. You want to know what the latest headlines are, and so forth. The reason I think this has such important intellectual and cognitive effects boils down to a basic limitation in the human brain. And that basic limitation is the very small capacity of our working memory. We have basically two kinds of memory that we use. Working memory, which is very short-term store. It's everything that comes at you at any second. It's basically the contents of your consciousness at any moment in your waking life. In the capacity of working memory it used to be thought that we could take in about 7 things simultaneously. But more recent research says no, that's much too high. Actually, it's probably more like 2 to 4 bits of information we can hold at any one moment in our mind. So working memory is kind of this thimble-sized piece of memory. And then you have long-term memory, which is enormously expansive. Nobody's really been able to say there's only such and such a capacity of long-term memory. It seems to be able to expand to fit whatever we want to entrust to it. The problem comes that if you overload your working memory, if you're trying to take in too much information simultaneously, that information goes into and out of your working memory so quickly that you can never transfer it, at least not in any coherent way, into your long-term memory. And what you're left with is kind of this blur of information. The problem there is that it's only when experiences and facts and other information makes that transition to long-term memory, when it's consolidated, as brain scientists say, that we weave it together with everything else we know, all the other information in our memory, and that's how we get deep conceptual understanding of phenomena. That's how we build a store of personal knowledge. And if our working memory is constantly overloaded, and this is a technical term, educators think about for a long time, for instance, thought about the risk of cognitive overload. If you give students too much stuff too quickly, their understanding and their comprehension goes down. And essentially what we're doing, what this technology is doing in a very powerful way, is keeping us in a perpetual state of cognitive overload. Information is flying into and out of our memory so quickly that we're unable to bring it over into long-term memory and weave it into deep personal knowledge and conceptual thinking. In my book, I go through a number of studies that show the effects of this overload, and you can see it, for instance, in comparisons of reading traditional text versus reading text with hyperlinks in it, hypertext. Even when people don't click on the links, their comprehension goes down when they read hypertext for the simple reason that their brain very, very quickly has to analyze the link and say, do I click on this or not? Is this important or not? And that, again, adds more of a load to your mind and distracts you from the actual meaning of whatever you're taking in. And you see it also in multimedia. The more different types of media that come at you simultaneously, also your comprehension goes down. You see it in studies. There have been tons of studies of interruptions, particularly online interruptions, through instant messaging, through email, and so forth. And again, those distractions, that overload of our mind, decreases comprehension, decreases memory, decreases understanding. The one study in particular I'll point out is one that was done recently. It was published in 2009. It was done at Stanford in California. And the researchers took two groups of people, heavy media multitaskers and light media multitaskers, and then they gave them a whole range of cognitive tests to check their skill at controlling their attention, at controlling what was in their working memory so they could move it to long-term memory, and numerous other tests of cognitive skill, mental skill. And what they found was the heavy multitaskers performed worse on every single measure of cognitive ability, even though they were quite confident when you asked them separately that they were doing a great job and were incredibly efficient and were great at juggling things. In fact, they did worse than the light multitaskers on every test. This particular chart was a test of ability to evaluate information, to figure out if information was important or just trivia. And as the number of distractions go up, you can see that the heavy multitaskers' accuracy in determining whether information was important or not goes down, and goes down sharply compared to the light multitaskers. And the scariest part of the study was they also did tests on multitasking skill. And even on tests on multitasking skill, heavy multitaskers did worse than light multitaskers. Exactly kind of the opposite you'd think would happen. They were actually slower at shifting their mental focus from one task to another and then back again. And the head of the laboratory, Clifford Nass, who did the study, summed it up by saying that multitaskers are suckers for irrelevancy. What becomes important is just the information. It doesn't matter so much whether it's important or trivial. It's just the more you can get, the happier you are, and the more you think you're being smart. In another paper, also published in 2009, one of the leading American developmental psychologists looked at 50 studies of how different media technologies influence learning and thinking, and this went back 30 or 40 years, included studies of gaming, studies of television, studies of the internet, and so forth. And the scientist Patricia Greenfield concluded that screen media builds new strengths in visual spatial intelligence. There's definitely gains, cognitive gains. We can rotate images in our minds better than we used to be able to. The more time we spend on screens, we can spot patterns in visual information. These are important gains. But the way we get those improvements in that side of our cognitive, in that side of our brain, the side that processes information quickly, is only by sacrificing what she calls deep processing, which includes mindful knowledge acquisition, inductive analysis, critical thinking, imagination, and reflection. So there's certainly a trade-off here as our brains adapt to this new information-rich and interruption-rich environment. And some people say, well, you know, sure, we lose some things, but the things we gain are better. And yet, when you look at studies like this, and you look across all the research, everybody can come to their own conclusions about what's most valuable about human thought, but it seems to me that what the internet encourages is improving in primitive ways of thinking, kind of keeping track of everything going on around you, and shifting your focus constantly. And the more sophisticated ways of thinking, things like reasoning, creativity, reflection, those things that have defined what we think of as a rich mental life for centuries, those are the things we're sacrificing. It's interesting and valuable, I think, to compare the internet as an information medium with an earlier information medium, the printed book. If you think about the printed book, its great quality is that there's nothing else going on when you open up a book. You open up a book and it's just words. And you know, today it seems incredibly boring, like that's all? But in fact, that's its great strength as an intellectual technology. It trains us to do something that doesn't come natural to us, to filter out distractions, to shield us from interruptions. And it trains our brain, I think, at a very deep level. And I think this is one of the effects of the popularization of books after Gutenberg invented the press in 1450. It trains us to be more attentive thinkers, to go against the primitive urge to constantly shift our focus. The internet is precisely the opposite. You can put the same words onto a computer screen and hook that machine up to the net, but instead of shielding us from distraction and interruption, the net, as it's designed as a technology, bombards us with distractions and interruptions. It surrounds all information with many, many more and different types of information. So you lose that kind of calmness that allowed us to think deeply, to interpret deeply, to transfer information from working memory to long-term memory. The net, as it begins to push aside the book as the central information technology and intellectual technology of our lives, is also pushing aside that ethic of attentiveness that the book spread throughout society. And, you know, if you're in any doubt about how quickly and how overwhelmingly this change is happening, you only have to look, and again, I'm using American figures, so hopefully the Dutch are a little better than this, but America's bad habits become the world's bad habits eventually. So if you look at the daily life of an average American adult these days, that person spends 8.5 hours looking at a screen, television, computer, mobile phone, only 20 minutes actually reading from printed pages. And this is a shift that's been going on, I have to say, since before the internet, but the internet is accelerating this shift. And what we're doing as we go through this is we're shifting what we emphasize in our thinking and what we value in our thinking. And we're sacrificing that kind of deep engagement for perpetual skimming and scanning. And that's not to say skimming and scanning and multitasking are bad. They're also extremely valuable skills. We wouldn't want to do without them. But increasingly, that's how we live all of our mental life. We're losing the balance between attentive thought and distracted, fast-paced thought. So in conclusion, I think it's important to look both at the net's benefits, which are enormous in many ways, unprecedented power to find information, to filter information, improvements in lots of visual skills like pattern recognition. Many people have new avenues of expression. They can post words or pictures or videos to a broad audience in a way that was never possible before, an extremely important benefit of the web. And the web seems to help collaborative forms of problem solving. There's no doubt that connecting with lots of people simultaneously can help you be creative in certain ways and solve problems, certain types of problems. But for most of the last 20 years, we've been focused very much on those benefits, and we've been enjoying them and kind of seduced by them. But I think what's becoming clearer and clearer is that there are high costs to our ever-growing use of this technology as well. And some of those are very practical. In some cases, there's a loss of productivity that companies are dealing with as workers find it so easy to shift their focus that they never stay. As soon as you hit a hard spot in a problem or a challenge, you're kind of so used to changing your focus, you just change your focus and don't work through those difficult things. I think also it's impeding some forms of deep creativity, particularly the types of creativity that lead us away from the pack, away from common wisdom and toward counterintuitive, new types of ideas. It's pretty clear from studies of attentiveness that that kind of creativity does require focus and does require us to filter out distractions. I think it also begins to erode personal knowledge building. We start to think that, oh, we can just go out and Google everything. We don't have to entrust things to our own memory, but it's only by bringing things into our own memory that we begin to weave our experiences and what we learn together to form truly personal knowledge. And again, if you're always distracted, if you're not paying attention, that ability begins to go away as well. On a much less practical side, but I think a very important side, it's stealing from us the ideal of solitary contemplation and reflection. Again, these were concepts that were central to the ideal intellectual life until recently, and now it's almost as if there's something shameful if you're kind of disconnected and just alone with your own thoughts. It's become so expected in our work lives, our social lives, our educational lives that we're always connected, always exchanging messages, that I think we're even beginning to redefine the contemplative side of our mental lives as dispensable and maybe even a little embarrassing, and maybe you shouldn't be doing that. And finally, as you take away those kind of abilities, those kind of creative, counterintuitive, contemplative abilities, I think you also begin to erode some of the basic foundations of culture. If you look across the great works of culture, whether it's art, literature, science, political thought, whatever, these more often than not, in fact almost always, come from people who were able to think deeply and linearly and intensively about one thing for a long period of time. And as we shrink the number of people who are encouraged to do that or even able to do that, you have to believe that we'll also strip a lot of the richness out of our cultural life and out of our society. So let me end with a quote from T.S. Eliot. He wrote this 30 years ago, not 30 years ago, he wrote this in the 1930s, much longer ago than that, in one of his plays. And he wrote, "Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" What this tells us is that this struggle with distraction, with interruption, this kind of the world's way of making us think that simply gathering information is sufficient for knowledge has been around a long time. It's probably been around, in fact, throughout human history. People have fought that urge to be distracted and be interrupted. What's changed now is that distractions and interruptions are cumulative. And with this new technology that's incredibly geared toward disrupting our train of thought and keeping us in this perpetual state of distraction and perpetual state of interruption, I think Eliot's questions become more important than ever, and ones that all of us would do well to think very, very deeply about. even as we enjoy all the great things that the internet provides. Thank you.
Nicholas Carr, thank you very much, and you can now recover. So, how many people checked their mobile phones or any other form of distraction over the past 45 minutes?
Pretty good.
Pretty good, yeah, or they're just liars, that's all. I mean, that's another possibility. But that's not bad, no. Yeah, so maybe we are slow in becoming, taking on American bad habits. Let's now bring in our two panelists. First of all, Nancy McKinstry, the CEO of Wolters Kluwer, who will approach this also from the business side. Please, a very warm applause. And yeah. And Marleen Stikker, one of our best minds when it comes to digital matters, the director of the Waag Society. Nancy, I think you're going first.
Well, first of all, thanks for welcoming me. I very much enjoyed Nick's book. My approach to the topic tonight is really coming from two dimensions. One is as a publisher, that's what Wolters Kluwer has historically done. And two, how the internet has so profoundly changed both our industry and our customers. Just a few quick words about the company. We started back in 1836 by a gentleman named Mr. Wolters. And we were essentially publishing education materials, and for about 200 years, that's what we did. We published for doctors, lawyers, accountants, etc. If you look today, 54% of our revenues come from producing online information and software products. So a profound change in our industry. Why is that? I think a little bit of what Nick talked about is underway among our customer groups. If you go out and you talk to your doctors, your accountants, your lawyers, the single biggest thing they tell us is that they have too much information. And I actually saw this quote from Eric Schmidt, who is the chairman of Google. He said that there is 5 exabytes of information created every 2 days. And 5 exabytes, if you took from the beginning of time until till 2003, that is 5 exabytes of data. So just the amount of information that our customers are being asked to digest is overwhelming, and no doctor or lawyer or accountant could possibly do that. So what we find in the business, and maybe again it's a bit tied to some of the things Nick just said, is that the value that our customers bring to all of you as their clients has really shifted. If you talk to somebody 20 years ago, a lawyer would spend hours researching something to produce a brief. A doctor would read every medical journal in their specialty, read every book to be able to be good at their profession. Today, it's completely different. That is not what they are valued for. Their value now is to be able to find the right information as quickly as possible and then apply that information to the patient, to the client. And so as a result of that, we as publishers do not just produce books anymore. What we do is more and more, we're producing not just online information, but more and more smart tools. Our customers really expect that the information they need comes to them when they need it, and then they apply that information. And just a really quick example, I happened to be talking to one of our doctors last week, Dr. Valentine, who works at the Haga Hospital up in The Hague. He's 62 years old, started using our products, again, 20 years ago or so. And he talked about how in the old days, his value add was I had to read every journal, get to know all this information, and then impart it to my residents, impart it to my patients. And if you think about medicine, every 10 years, the volume of medical information doubles. So again, impossible for this doctor to keep up. So what he talked about is using one of our products called Up to Date that basically synthesizes all this information that's available in journals to tell him exactly where to go, what kind of tests to do to find the right treatment for the patient. And now he has shifted from reading all this information to spending 15 minutes looking up something on UpToDate and treating the patient. So just a profound change. So, for us, the internet has just radically changed what our customers do. It's radically changed our business. And what I see the future for publishers like Wolters Kluwer is more and more moving into artificial intelligence and really making the information smart in a way, because there's just so much of it that no one can be knowledgeable about everything that's out there. So for us, it's actually very exciting. All of the things now with mobility and with iPads just provides us even more opportunities. So I actually get excited about what the new technology can do for us, even though I recognize certainly some of the things that Nick said about distraction and about sort of information overload.
All right. Thank you very much, Nancy. Marleen.
When I was organizing the birthday party that I did this afternoon for my youngest daughter, she said, I want to do a treasure hunt in the city, and I thought, oh, we have a nice tool for that. We have 7 Scenes. It's a platform to make location-based tours and games on the iPhone. But then I was reading the book, and I realized that it was not a good idea for 7-year-olds. So I took a pencil and a paper, and we did a great job, actually. We had a very great time this afternoon. I'm a little bit, let's say, I'm a little bit in doubt after listening to your story and reading your book. On one hand, I feel a big recognition. Finally, I'm not alone in this problem. This being distracted and feeling that my mind is changing. I think that's how you tell your story, that it's also starting to, that you understood that your mind was functioning differently. And actually reading your book, I realized I have a mind of its own. That's what I've started to think, like, how is my mind functioning? And hello mind. Which was a very interesting, so only because of that, it's a very interesting book to do this. It's a very interesting exercise to think about how my mind is working. And actually, I thought I had a very nice mind. I was sort of like, hey, what a nice thought I had. But then, and I suddenly felt very responsible. Thinking, oh my God, what have I done? 70 years of time spending getting people to the internet back in the 1993, working with the Waag, making, especially in the educational environment, getting internet into the schools. Oh my God, what have I done? So should I stop being a media professional whatsoever? So this question, what's next, what to do? But then I also got a little bit angry. I felt like, well, he's forgetting a lot of things. It's about the tools for the mind, intellectual tools, but the net is not just information. It's about relations, it's about narratives, it's about storytelling, it's about engagement. So it's also a social technology. So I don't think you really reflect on that aspect of the internet. So I think you take one part of it. And I think so it's not about all the other stuff that actually I like the most of using these computer networks. But at the same time, again, if you think about how we are now using game principles in other areas of our society, like education or in making people feel responsible for environment, we're training ourselves to be rewarded as we do in games. So we're also not only training our minds to different, and our mind is changing because of this training. Our behavior is changing as well. So if we now want to have people feel responsible for the environment, we think, well, let's make a game for it, and then we reward people. And so, is there any moral? Do we approach it still as a moral entity, as a responsibility, or is it just a game? So I think there's a lot of things going on here, which I think is, so on the one hand, I think you're not really addressing those issues, but at the same time, I think maybe it's even worse, as what you're telling. So I'm in doubt. Maybe this whole idea of serious gaming is really a stupid idea. We should just talk with people and make them responsible for their actions and go in a moral and ethical way, and not in making sort of make it nicer than it actually is. But again, I think we are, this responsibility, I think I think I like the quote of your central question, like what's the ethics of the net? And are we aware that we are actually implying ethics with the design of the net? And that question I think is very, very interesting. It's a very hard question, it's a very difficult question. But I think it's very important because then we see it as a design. And technologies, for some people, technologies just sort of like are act of gods. They come out of the sky, and then they're suddenly there, and then we have to cope with them. But technologies are being designed. I mean, some people are responsible for making the technologies. We are all, in a way, shaping these technologies in a certain way. And I think what I've seen now I think this question of responsibility is also in how we are going to design these applications. How are the search engines being designed? I think your chapter on Google is very interesting because you're actually sort of revealing that, in a way, Google is designed for us to be distractive, to not give us the information, to keep us continuously searching and searching and searching. And you can design these tools differently. You can make educational games which based there's this training model now for children to do mathematics, and then they're pressured in time and they get rewards. I think is this the way? This is an idea of how gaming could help to train certain tasks, but you could also design it differently. So I think this question about design and the responsibility of the designers in this, and not just designers in the sense of how it looks, but also the coders and the technology. I think that's a very, very interesting question. So for me, it opens up a whole new field, like what's next, what to do now. If I understand you right in reading your book and all the scientific research that you are sort of using to make your argument, our mind is already, my mind and a lot of our minds are already being changed. They are already changed. So maybe we should start with an internet-free day, or internet-free zones, or is this the approach, or is the approach that should we go back, or should we go and design different technologies? Should we be aware of how we are designing technologies and then trying to think about this ethical and morality within the design of technologies?
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Before Nicholas, you react. I mean, you make very clear in the book that you felt that something was happening with your brain. So your brain was telling you something's happening with me. Do you feel the same way? I mean, you just said that you feel that something's happening to your brain.
Yes, I can talk now to my brain, and my brain says to me that it's distracted all the time. Yeah, yeah. And I try to figure out why and where, and then until now I thought it was my fault. It was and now I understand it's not my fault.
Right.
I'm not. It's there. It's my brain. It's actually doing it. Yeah.
Nancy, how about you?
Yeah, I think that for me, I don't do as much as what you talk about. I don't SMS. I don't tweet. Maybe my age, I think. But so for me, you have to apply a discipline. Otherwise, you get enormously distracted. I think again for our business, the internet has had more of a positive than a negative on both our customers and our business. But personally, I can actually see that if you don't put some limits, you could spend all day long just answering emails, right, which is not very useful. Yeah.
And how about all of you? How many people hear this? I will stop then because otherwise it will become like this counseling session. But how many of you have this sort of fear or inkling that you're reprogramming your brain? And you have more trouble than you expect concentrating.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so the rest is in denial, according to the book. Nicholas, if you want to elaborate on some of the points.
Yeah, I mean, one of the points that was made that I think needs to be emphasized again is all the good things that come with the net. And I mean, I would be the first to acknowledge that as a writer doing research, the net has sped up and made me much more efficient, much able to find information very, very quickly. And in fact, it's because it's such a powerful technology and gives us so many benefits and gives us a lot of pleasure as well. That's the reason we use it so much. If it wasn't good, if it wasn't a powerful technology, we wouldn't use it very much and we wouldn't be having this discussion because it wouldn't be having any effect. So the good parts and the benefits and the costs go together, and you can't untangle them. And I also think it's true to some degree that we've made a series of design decisions, and maybe not consciously, but they've been made for us or whatever, that do emphasize the kind of distracting quality of the web and that keep us searching and keep us juggling information. And I think at a very practical level, there are some good signs that there are people working to counter those effects. You even have applications today that you can program to cut off your internet connection, like Freedom, or there's an application called Antisocial that will actually cut off your access to Facebook and stuff. And on the one hand, it's kind of sad that we have to look to software to solve our addiction to technology, but nevertheless, it shows that there are people who are worried about this and are trying to do new things. And there's reading applications like Instapaper and Readability that isolate text from everything else going on the web. On the other hand, those type of applications are still not very popular at all. And it's kind of like, buying a home exercise machine and then never using it. You think you're going to use these things and then you never do. And I think we could redesign the internet to moderate these effects. But on the other hand, I suspect that actually the internet does, and computers do what they're good at, which is processing lots of information quickly and in a multitasking, multimedia environment. And actually, I think that's kind of the reality of the technology, and I'm not sure we are going to redesign it. So if you want to moderate the effects, I think you have to back away a bit from the technology itself.
That's right.
Sorry, you go. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, I think there are some signs that, for example, if you look at visualizations techniques, which have ability to make very complex data accessible for people at a glance. There you see a use of technology where it's actually helping us to have deeper insight, have a deeper knowledge about certain processes. So there I see actually that people would never have that sort of insight, are now having access to certain knowledge. Another example, augmented reality, where I have this example from our own practice where we gave young children a phone and learned them medieval history in the center of Amsterdam by contextualizing medieval information within the real city, so that they are able to see the 15th and 16th century within the 20th century. So you certainly give people an insight, not in the book. In the book you can read about it, and in the real world you can embed it. You can actually immerse in it, and you can really feel the history. So these are all examples of using internet. Actually, we did an interesting project also with the John Adams Institute in New York, where we brought this sort of relationship between the Dutch and the new and old Amsterdam, and that people can see the old Amsterdam in the new Amsterdam, which again gives people access to a certain type of knowledge and deeper knowledge than they would ever have access to before. So yes, I do see designs and approaches that give a lot of people, not in the expert sense. I think reading this, like I just told you, I had this experience reading Phänomenologie Geistes from Hegel. I don't think I will ever be able to do that again. And I don't think a lot of people will actually want to do that. But I think for a lot of people there are ways of using the technologies that actually give them more deeper insight.
Yeah, and what we find, it's kind of interesting what you're both saying, is what we find, if you had asked me 15 years ago, I would have said books would have been gone by now. And they're clearly not gone, right? And what we find over and over again when we watch everything that our customers do is that most customers use this collection of material to be a doctor, a lawyer, et cetera. It includes books, includes online, more and more it includes workflow tools. And so we've sort of studied, well, when do they use a book? When do they go online? And it very much has to do with their inherent, what do they know about the subject? And then what are they trying to find out? And, we find over and over again that there is this role for a book when somebody wants to get sort of deep into a subject they don't know much about. They just want to sit down and they want to read, 50 pages on it to get smarter about it. But if they want to do something else, they'll go online. And so I do think there's a role that all these kind of formats and technologies can be put together to help people get smarter, make better decisions.